So just out of curiosity, how many of you are using Adobe Analytics right now? All right. How about Google Analytics then? Great. So it's a pretty decent balance. So hopefully a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today will address both of those use cases, although we will be going into some of the ways that Adobe Analytics then connects with these other products. So after we've listened to our clients, then the next thing that we strive to do is to really connect with them, to not just treat them as a whole. We understand that averages lie, and that just as each of us in this room are unique, we need to identify the unique segments within our visitors and the different messages that they're interested in. And one of the greatest ways that we do that is through a solution called Audience Manager, which helps us see the traits about those people and to put them into groups that allows us to target them easily. And then finally, we want to make sure that we really connect with them through the advertising that we serve to them, so that our advertising feels less like sales and feels more like a very welcome and valuable answers to questions. So as we get into some of the details here, I'm sure that many of us are struggling with competition, striving to really differentiate ourselves and stand out among the many options that our customers are looking at. And really, in a world where all of our customers and all of our competitors are probably in meetings like this, learning how to beat up on you, the main way in which you can survive that type of technology-fueled disruption is to really have this very strict customer focus. And one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career is that I began to actually perceive my keywords and campaigns and my ads as living things. I would punish them, or I would try to be patient with them, or I would try to promote them. And all of my reports revolved around marketing fictions, things that didn't really exist. And I took my focus off of the people who were real. And that's hopefully what Adobe Analytics can do for you is, yes, give you insight into how your campaigns are performing, but then allow you to see through those campaigns into the people that they're interacting with and make sure that they're personalized for them. And for the few customers that we have that do that, for the few customers we have that look beyond the campaign and keyword reports into the actual audience segments and the way it needs to be customized for them, they don't have just a minor bump in improvement. They don't just barely edge out their competition, but they dominate their industries. For example, in retail, they have twice the conversion rate. We're not just talking about going from 2 to 3, but from going 3 to 6, and that's a significant amount of revenue. For financial services companies, when we did this survey, we were looking at across all the Adobe customers. And we saw for them that they had half the bounce rate, so people were even more engaged with their landing pages. And then regardless of which industry you're in, even with media, we found that the media companies that really looked at their analytics, that really modified their advertising according to their audiences, that they had even a third more engagement with all of their customers. And so that's what I want for you. I don't want just a 1 or 2% bump, but I want you to be able to dominate your industries. And I feel that Adobe Analytics, Media Optimizer, and Audience Manager can help you to do that. So the question comes, well, okay, I'm doing great now, but for me to get that type of dominance, how do I reinvent myself? And unfortunately, you can't do it without risk. It's going to be difficult. And when we went out and asked all of our customers why they thought it was difficult, some of the reasons they said is that even though they wanted to change, few of them really knew where to focus or what to really try and learn or even which questions to ask. And so that's another part of the presentation today, is to help you find really difficult questions to ask yourselves and your vendors regarding your audiences so that you can get to deeper insights about them. And after we find out exactly how we want to change, so for me specifically was to take all my expertise around search and translate it to becoming an expert in display. You have to find out ways in which you as a manager might be facilitating that for the people who work for you, or as a practitioner, how you can overcome some of your environmental challenges to get that done. But I promise you this, regardless of whatever your manager or in your environment is doing, the things that we'll learn today will be applicable and you'll be able to actually make changes right away. And so as we're going out and we're trying to change, we just have to remember that we're doing that because the whole world around us is changing. Even though I've been with Adobe for 7 years, I've had 4 different jobs there. And I'm sure you've gone through the same thing either at your current company or at past ones. And so As we adapt to change, one of the biggest things that honestly I've just had to understand in a little bit better detail is the concept of programmatic. Now you might be smiling, oh, I understand that really well. And that's how I felt a while ago. And the more I look into it, the more nuanced and detailed the topic seems to be. I used to hear programmatic and I would think, oh, it's just, instead of the premium ad buys, it's some of the remnants, banners in the corners, and some of the cheaper display inventory that is then bought through RTB. And that was a decent start, but it's so much more. After that, we find out, okay, yes, programmatic is the automation that gives us transparency, rather than us just going to our DSP or to the ad networks and hoping that they're giving us what we need. Through this concept, we're able to actually see into the inventory and audiences that we're buying, and also get some automation around actually buying it with that better data that we have access to. And so in another symposium that we had previously, we were fortunate to have Joanna O'Connell from Forrester come along and tell us some of the great things that she had heard from surveying many large advertisers about programmatic and about advertising in general. And just to fly through some of the main findings she found is that some of the very largest, smartest marketers are really shifting towards this programmatic form of ad buying, where previously they might have done it through in-person type of manual interactions, but now they're really trusting technology so much more with all of their ad spend. And even though that's already large now, it's expected to get even larger over the next year or two. And then finally, it's not just display. Yes, display is the main area where programmatic helps us out, but as we get across to mobile and video and even social, you're starting to see this programmatic automation start to help people reach audiences that just wouldn't have been scalable before. And the reason why is not just because of the scale and the access, but the returns that people are seeing from that. I remember back when I was purely a search expert, I kind of looked down my nose at every other channel because search is king. Yes, we have the greatest conversion rate and the greatest returns and everything's wonderful. And that was because display a few years ago was very different than it is today. There's no reason why we can't get the same types of returns from other channels as we get from search, as we apply some of the principles that we learned there, especially as you see concepts like RLSAs or remarketing lists for search ads actually borrowing from other channels like display and going after audiences. I definitely think you're going to be able to see these returns from all channels. And then, even though in-house teams seem to lean towards one platform, we understand that some of you are from agencies and have to be able to connect with many different types of tools. And so we've designed Media Optimizer and Audience Manager in a way that whether you're in-house or an agency, that we can connect with a variety of tools that you use. And so even though maintaining inventory quality is a challenge where we have to really focus on the audiences that we're going after, it's still possible to overcome the complexity of that market and get the returns we need. So in general, if there's just a few things that we would have you remember from Adobe's observations of the market, it's that the former separation between ad tech and marketing tech is going away, and through solutions like the Adobe Marketing Cloud, they're coming together in one place where you no longer have to have many different contracts and lots of different types of training and many different tools to integrate, but you can truly choose one platform that can help you to accomplish all these things. And then as we all shift towards programmatic, not just remnant display inventory, but across channels with automation to help us make better decisions, we can have a more consistent experience across all those channels as well. So there's these three main pieces I keep on referring to, and that's because the campaign management tasks that you're probably familiar doing through a DoubleClick or even a Marin or a Kenshu, those things can be done through Media Optimizer across search, display, and social in a way that takes even better advantage of your data than any of the other solutions out there. And then for the many different DMPs that you might be connected with, some of you might have heard of Demdex from only a little while ago, and Demdex was acquired by Adobe and rebranded to Audience Manager because of the deeper integrations we have, and taking that first and third party data, connecting it into one set of traits that you can organize into a segment and then target inside of your advertising. And then, of course, as you're delivering all of that, you want to make sure that your measurement associated with it combines the art and science that Sam was mentioning earlier. And Adobe Analytics is a big bridge in connecting all those pieces together to give you that transparency. So you might be wondering, well, what does that really mean? How do these products really connect with each other? So to be a little bit more specific, if we start with Media Optimizer, where you actually execute your ad buys, and Adobe Analytics, you have things being passed in both directions. You have all of your conversion and engagement metrics being passed over from Adobe Analytics into Media Optimizer. So basically, if you are a retailer, you could have everything from profit, revenue, orders, card ads, product views, all ported over to Media Optimizer without changing any of your implementation, without having to contact your IT team and have new pixels and new code implemented. Merely by updating a few URLs, we're able to get all those events ported over to Media Optimizer so that we can then optimize your bids and budgets there for you. But then at the same time, we don't just settle for the one-way integrations that some other tools do, but we then take everything valuable within Media Optimizer that Adobe Analytics could use and we pass it right back. So if you have an analyst team, which is really sharp, but they could get even more insights out of having access to traffic and cost and all the classifications of your account structure, so account, campaign, group, keyword match type. All of those things are passed from Media Optimizer back into analytics. And I was able to see just earlier this week what that can really mean to our large company. I was meeting with a company with a brand I really, really respect, and they were asking amazing questions. But when we got to the end of the conversation, we had to realize that communication was pretty limited. The analytics team was still separate from the advertising team, which was still separate from the agency. And really only through integrations like this are we able to bring those three teams together and have them be one team. And so as you're reflecting on how your own company works, ask yourself, does your advertising team actually log in to your analytics tool? Does your agency even have access to that analytics? And really, through a marketing cloud like this, those questions can be so much easier to answer. But as we move away from the integration between Media Optimizer and Adobe Analytics, and we think more about how we can reinvent ourselves and really stay connected with Audience Manager, I told you that Audience Manager took first and third-party data and pulled it together. Well, what I really mean by that first-party data? Well, it's the data that you own, the data that you probably value the most. That's site engagement data, or even CRM data that you own all by yourself. That you could then go out and say, well, from now on, I don't want to just target globally, but I want to target people who have engaged with my site specifically in this way, either by looking at this content or buying that product. And I want to make sure that any offer I give them in the future is connected from the signals they've given me in the past. Now that's a great start, all of that CRM and web analytics data that's first party. But then you have that third party data that's also essential that anybody who's involved in display would know. That as we really want to expand our reach and we want to be able to go out and get that demographic and psychographic and financial data, that we can go out to the data exchanges and through Audience Manager be able to take even more information for people that have not yet engaged with us and combine that together into one consistent data source. So that when we're saying, I want to go out and find crazy Americans who love Amsterdam, that you can easily find me and that you can find people who are like me and make sure that the messages you send to me connect with my needs. So moving forward a little bit, the really difficult part about this is that it all needs to happen in a split second. And that's why the connection between Audience Manager and Media Optimizer is so helpful, because within one set of solutions, you have your DMP in Audience Manager and your DSP in Media Optimizer helping you to execute these buys in that split-second time. And so if you're looking at an example of how this works, you start off with this bottom layer where you have your first-party data, again, the things that happened on your site and the things that you have in your CRM, connected with everything you're buying with the data exchanges, being consolidated into one place for those audience segments, and then not just used on display, but used across channels to keep those audience segment definitions consistent. So After that, we mentioned a little bit earlier that for many in-house teams, they strive to standardize as much as possible, and they often lean on one tool. However, with agencies, we want to partner with you, and we understand that agencies have to connect with a variety of systems. And so even though the ideal for us, yes, is that you take advantage of the Adobe Marketing Cloud integrations, the reality is that if you have contracts with other systems, Demdex lived for many, many years before it was Audience Manager, and it was able to be successful because regardless of which system and which tool that you use, it's able to digest that data. And so we would hope that regardless of which ad network you're connected with, which DSP you're using, that you'd consider this as an option to help you combine your data. And to kind of segue from the concept of Audience Manager and Display and move a little bit towards search, I mentioned a little bit earlier the concept of RLSAs. I cannot stress this enough. This is my favorite freaking ad unit. I love RLSAs. There's this feeling I get about them right now that I have only felt once before. And it was about 2 years ago when PLAs first came out. So PLAs, those product listing ads, where we suddenly went from the boring 10 blue links to actually having thumbnails and details about the products that we're buying on search. It blew my mind. I loved it. And for a while it was free, and for a while people made a pile of money if they were early movers. And then of course it went to a paid model, and now it's very, very competitive. We are in that same place right now, but only for a little bit longer with RLSAs. These remarketing lists for search ads is going to be what every search conference is going to be about for the next few years. And through the integration of Audience Manager and Media Optimizer, we can begin taking advantage of them now and be one of those first movers that doesn't just target search in general, but remarkets to specific audiences. So if you're looking for a really quick rundown of how it works, basically inside of Google, you define your audience. Inside of Media Optimizer, you then manage that audience that has been defined. And then within Audience Manager, we're able to take the Google remarketing tag and avoid the implementation problems again. We basically just pull the Google tag inside of the Audience Manager tag, and we're then able to see whenever people engage with us and then use that cookie to go then and offer them more personalized messages. And it's not just the more personalized messages, but it's also the ability to go after traffic that would have never been feasible for you before. There might be more general terms. You know, an extreme example might be computer. You might not ever go after traffic that is generally targeted towards computer. But when you have someone who is engaged with you and has had many product views and cart ads before, maybe that more general keyword all of a sudden becomes profitable because you do have hope that it'll pay off for you. So you have the audience, you have the ad personalization, so that you're not just showing them the same creative when they come back. You have the bid modifiers to make sure that you're going after terms that maybe you couldn't afford before. And then you also have the ability to exclude traffic. That if for some reason your business is set up in a way where you have one conversion and you don't really need that return business, you're able to avoid showing your paid media to people who are just going to use it as a login for your system and instead save money. Anyway, so Sam mentioned a little bit earlier that one of the big reasons why we're having this session right now is just because the way that Google and Facebook is working is significantly different, even just from last year. That we're more and more reliant on some of the paid ad types that they have. And so here are some of the ways in which I'd like to help you take advantage of those ad types and to improve your efficiency. So the video I was going to show you is of a man named Walter Rowe. He's my favorite driver. He's the best in the world, I think. And when I watch videos of him driving, he makes me feel this way. And I love it. I love racing. And so as I begin to take the way I feel about racing and apply it to the way that I feel about advertising, these are our 4 general principles that I try to use in my day-to-day optimization of marketing and advertising to beat my competition. So the first is relatively basic, but too frequently neglected. And it's just the concept of relevancy between your query, whether it's a search query or social or display, and your creative. I have to do everything we can to try and make our advertising, again, feel like an answer to a question rather than us pushing things on people. And then, of course, after that comes one of the even more neglected problems. But it's that accountability beyond the click and that alignment between the creative that someone saw and the landing page experience that they have. There's this disease that I suffered from before and that I see many people suffering from now. It's kind of like not my job-itis, where they just say, it's not my problem. I got you the good traffic, and now it's the web analyst team to make sure that the landing page is good and that the site experience is good. But for the few advertisers I see that are able to cross that threshold and take accountability for the landing page and site experience, it's those that are the dominant players in their industry. So, if you are an advertiser or if you are a manager of advertisers, I would ask you to think to yourself, where does the accountability stop? And how can I maybe extend that deeper into the experience by giving my advertising team access and authority to look at the site and suggest changes, at least for the landing pages. Now, this next concept, congruence, is kind of weird. If I had to really sum it up, it comes down to the concept of attention ratio. I would encourage you sometime today, even if you've done it before, to go and experience what your customers are experiencing. And the attention ratio is the concept that when you go to your landing page, there should be as close as possible to a one-to-one relationship between what could be done and what you want to be done, or what they want to have done. If your landing pages have 10, 15 different options that they could choose from, or interactions or events that they could trigger, it might be time to consider a more specific and more congruent landing page that helps them focus. And then finally down with engagement. This is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned even only in just the past 6 months. For the longest time, I have been obsessed with metrics that are really close to the bottom line. Profit, revenue, ROAS. Sometimes when I have to, I'll fall back to some sort of cost per conversion. But even though those things are great, and even though we can have wonderful conversations about attribution and allocation and all those things, some of the most neglected metrics are those huge chunks of metrics between the initial impression and that final conversion. All of that engagement in between often gets neglected too much. All of those leads started that get neglected for leads completed. All of those product views that get neglected for the final orders. If you can take into account what it is you could do with metrics and the whole experience, I promise you'll be able to find opportunities that you didn't realize were there before. So I'm going to take you to my happy place. I'll probably never own this happy place in real life, but I think about it sometimes. So as we hop in, this is how I dream about advertising, right? I'm going to jump in. I'm going to do search, display, and social. I'm going to be agile. I'm going to be all over the place, have my hands on everything. I'm going to make frequent changes, and then real life happens. Okay. I've got meetings. I have trouble with validation and data accuracy. I got to figure out and read really boring API documentation about how this new ad type works. And I get burned out from doing a lot of manual optimization. And there's just so many different buttons and concepts and levers to pull. What many of us need is a framework to give us focus and to help us see what matters most and use our very limited time in a powerful way. And so this is one of the main frameworks that I used to help me get out of that traffic and get back on the fast lane again and reinvent myself. And it comes down to this. Yes, if I were to jump into your accounts right now, the very first thing I would do is I'd ask you what your KPI is, what your most important metric is. And I would sort by that because we all know about the Pareto principle. Pareto, the mathematician that discovered the 80-20 rule, that the tiny minority of objects are responsible for the vast majority of performance. We all know that there's a few volume leaders that really push things for us, and that's fine. But to share a really embarrassing experience, when I was brand new, maybe only 4 or 5 months in. I did that for a client, and I created a bid rule that I thought was the most beautiful bid rule ever. It had like 7 steps to it, and rather than just saying, if my efficiency is bad, bid down, and if my efficiency is good, bid up, I had a whole bunch of different steps where if I was really far away from my target, I made a big change, and if I was close to my target, I made a small change. I was really proud of myself. I walked up to the client, and I said, here it is, this is going to be great. And the client asked me, what are you going to do for the other 95% of my keywords and campaigns? Because it's only that one sliver of them that actually converts. And so I went back to the drawing table and I said, okay, when that conversion that I really want to work with is empty or 0, I want to fall back to the next best thing. And for many of us, that's cost. And so to be honest, if I could jump in your account right now, whether it was search, display, or social, regardless of whether it was a campaign or a keyword report, the first thing I would do is I would say, for all the rows in this report, filter for conversions equals 0. Then sort by cost, and just show me those loss leaders. Show me those things that are the least efficient over that past time, and then hopefully we could have the courage to avoid ego bidding and advertising and just letting those loss leaders eat away at our performance. But even then, that's not enough. At some point, you're going to have campaigns or ads or keywords that even don't have any click activity. And there's going to be piles and piles of impressions. And that's another huge pool of opportunity that I see very rarely optimized. When both conversions are 0 and cost and traffic are 0, but impressions are huge. What are our worst offenders there where our ads are obviously misaligned and we're being ignored and just burning up opportunity? And so it just comes down to the concept that, yes, start as close to the bottom line as possible. Yes, have focus and priority on your most important metrics. But then when those things are empty, don't give up. Don't stop then. Fall back to the next best thing and optimize off of that. And so that was a good start, but we still weren't totally complete, because if I were to look at one of your reports like that, it would be huge. It would go on and on and on forever. And so after we find the 3 hidden segments in every report, it starts to look something kind of like this. So what you're looking at right now is an actual report in Excel. And it's just zoomed out to like 1%. And this has thousands of rows. And what you're seeing is the gray area is all the empty data points, all the cells that have a value of 0. And up at the green is that tiny sliver that had a value for every metric, because people had gone from impression to click to product ad to revenue and order. And then that big orange section, that's all of our wasted cost. And even that bigger red section is all of our ignored impressions. And I know that regardless of which channel you use and which report you look at, the report looks almost exactly like this. And I would hope that you're not just touching the green, or not just the green and orange, but all pieces. So as we move beyond that, we come to this principle here that I'll fly through a little bit faster. We already talked about choosing the best metric and falling back to the next best thing. But within each of those segments, there are 3 sub-segments. So we've talked about our filters, which we see on the side. And now it comes down to the sorts within those filters that help us to really find the actionable stuff. And the reason why I tell this to you, because I know many of you are not practitioners. I know many of you are directors and managers. This is the type of basic analysis that I wish that my clients and my bosses would do, because it would show them where I was making mistakes, but also show them where I was working really hard for them. And so regardless of whatever level of analytics access you have or experience you have, I promise you that you can do this type of analytics in less than 10 minutes. And as you find one of these subsegments for, let's say, non-converting objects with a really bad engagement rate, what are the worst offenders there? I really wish my client would say, why is it that these campaigns with no conversions do have traffic, but the traffic efficiency is crap? What is it that we can do about the targeting or the alignment there to help us improve that engagement and hopefully move them up into a better segment? So anyway, this is a framework that has helped me so much because it takes reports with millions of data points and narrows it down to the few that help us. But what Alan's going to show you here in just a few minutes is how even that framework begins to break down. Even that framework that can help you across channels and object types just gets so much more complex in the world that we actually live now. Because that was a framework I used very successfully 2-3 years ago when it was mostly keywords and match types. And now it's context as well of geo and time and audience and device. And that simple 3x3 framework then explodes into an exponentially larger and more complex situation. So to give you an example, we talked about the red of converting and the orange of non-converting cost. It's the green of converting, the orange of non-converting cost, and the red of ignored impressions. That's great. That makes us feel like we have tons of data to work with. But then as soon as you apply any of those dimensions of geo, time, audience, and device, all of a sudden the data becomes much more sparse. The decisions that you have has much fewer signals. And so we need to fall back to the E in race of engagement, where we're able to say, okay, even though the data felt sparse, now when I fall back from converting, whether that's revenue or leads or orders or whatever, and I look at all the other signals of value that I have before that, now I can make decisions on whether I should invest or whether I should pull back. And so what it comes down to is the ability to look at that complexity and maintain your frequency, maintain your action, to not get stuck in all of the data and stuck in our old habits and just look at reports and send reports and never actually make changes. And so one of the things that I would have you ask yourself or your teams is, what is our actual rhythm or cadence or frequency about pushing changes? And how can we visualize that? You know, many tools, cross channels, will provide you with a change history, and I would encourage you to dig into that and help to put some discipline in keeping that consistent. This is just one quick example. The blue line represents manual. You know, and to be totally honest, when I was a consultant back in the day, I would cram and burn out, and then cram and burn out, and it wasn't very consistent. And even though rules, regardless of channel, can give us a little bit more consistency, often the scale is not there. And really it's the Media Optimizer portfolios that help us to make more changes each day and keep that frequency consistent. And not only have it consistent, but to have it be data-driven. What we're visualizing here is that when I was making changes manually, the changes I would make, whether it was turning it off or turning it on or increasing it or decreasing it, were often just kind of instinctive flinch values. And even though they're distributed okay, they weren't always what the campaign really needed. And then with rules, its main limitation is that you're going to have to write the logic. And to really have this distributed well, you're going to probably have to write 30, 40 different lines of logic, which can be really intimidating. And it's through portfolio that we really find this ability to have a solid distribution, make sure that we're data-driven. And when I say portfolio, what I'm really talking about is the concept of trade-offs. Rather than just looking at one object at a time and saying, okay, you're inefficient, I'll bid you down. Or you're inefficient and I'll bid you up. To instead say, where should we spend our very next dollar or euro? If I only had one more euro to spend, where should I put it? And really there's a rank that's out there. And if you're putting the very next bit of investment in your campaigns, ideally it would be done in the place that has the largest marginal return. And that's what portfolio helps you see. The areas of largest marginal return across many, many objects, across search, display, and social. Anyway, so we all know that it's so much more complex than just our brand, but it's all the channels in our brand and all the different paid, earned, and owned sections of those channels. And as we get to the complexity of all that attribution, we can go from that happy place again. You know, besides racing, I love flying. But when we start to feel like a really good expert in display or search or social or wherever, as soon as we begin to try and reinvent ourselves, it gets worse and more complex. And as soon as we ask more attribution questions, it gets worse. And next, it feels like we're sitting in the space shuttle. We have absolutely no idea which button to push. And so before the session, I had Eric come and ask me about attribution. And if there was just one thing that I could say about attribution, it's this. If you're using a rules-based approach to attribution, that's not bad. You're going to see a lot of things written about last click being dead, and it's not true. It's only 75% dead, so it's almost gone. But if you're using rules-based attribution, pick a priority. Most of the time, last click or most recent is a good place to start. But make sure that you're going beyond that and just double-checking that same report from another attribution perspective, like first. And one of my favorite things to do is that I told you earlier, when you don't have the metric that you want, fall back to the next best thing. And so what I would mean here is that when you do that segmentation in your report, you say conversions equals 0, and this is the worst cost. I would say just look really quick at those same conversions from first click and see which one of those things are really feeding all the other terms and really being the root of other activity. And there's not going to be very many objects. But that 1 or 2 or 3% of keywords or campaigns or ads or whatever that are really, really powerful in first click but are horrible in last click, those are the few that will really bubble to the top quite easily and justify your investment. And then after you've done that a few times, then the smart question to ask is, what do you have to offer around algorithmic attribution? Where you're not forcing me to choose the weights between first or last or linear or decaying, but you're using math to suggest to me how that can be done. And I'd love to talk to you after the session about what our options are for doing that with Adobe Analytics. So as we get past that brain cramp and we begin to see the places where automation could work, I want to make it very clear that even though Media Optimizer and Audience Manager and Adobe Analytics has some very powerful automation, we're not asking you to turn over the controls to some pretend robot. We are not black box. We will make sure that, across the ranges from cruise control to a completely self-driving car, that we give you the transparency that you need to stay involved. As someone who is really passionate about analytics, I'm paranoid that the robots are trying to steal my job. I'm not going to let them do it. I'm not going to let them do it to you either. But there is a way to combine the best of what we do. You take some of these really old things that we used to do in the beginning of our careers and some of the new concepts that we're beginning to learn now as we reinvent ourselves. And the principle is that automation from the entire Adobe Marketing Cloud is intended to amplify you, to help you focus on the areas where more of the art is needed, such as personalization and creative alignment, and take off from you some of the loads around very clear patterns of bid and budget optimization. Let us take care of those things for you so that you can focus on connecting with your customers. And when you do that, we'll make sure that you can keep your hands on the wheel. We do that through the transparency that Alan's probably going to show you here in just a moment, of showing you why our automation made decisions the way that they did. And some of the best ways that you can hold our automation accountable for doing what you would do if you had infinite time is some of these reports here that I unfortunately do not see pulled very often, whether it's Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics. The vast majority of reports I see people focusing on is just a spreadsheet, again, of ads and campaigns and keywords. And we need to reinvent ourselves and look at something beyond those rates. I'll often ask myself, what is the return on ad spend? What is the cost per conversion? What is the conversion rate? And reports like this Fallout report don't lie. They don't let the averages lie across those many touches. Instead, they say, as things have gone from impression to click to product view to cart ad to order or lead started, lead generated, regardless of which industry you're in, here is where the bottleneck is. And that's another question to ask. Rather than, why is my conversion rate bad? Ask instead, where is the bottleneck? And it might be in your advertising, it might be in your site, but hopefully your teams are empowered to do both. After that, after you've done fallout reports and looked at the rates within the rates, You have the concept of pathing. Again, this is another principle that few advertisers are really experts at. Some web analysts might be really good at it. But pathing is very powerful in helping us see where people go on each step and what some of the most common streams and paths are. And whether you're in Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, I hope this is a report that you give a chance. But in the end, if there was just one report that you pull, I save the best for last. My favorite button or icon and feature in all of Adobe Analytics is this icon right here. And it's found at the top of every report and at the front of every row. It's the subrelation and breakdown button. And basically what it does is say, for this simple question that I'm answering, give me deeper details. For this campaign, show me the products that were sold. For this account, show me the geos where we are performing best. For this ad, show me the devices that perform best on it. And unfortunately, it's pretty rare that I see advertisers ask that type of question. They just stay at that top level account, campaign, or ad report. And we can find so many better insights if we say, for that campaign then, show me those details that I can either set bid modifiers on in search or that I can change my audiences on in display and social. And so even though some other tools might be able to give you that for things that are available out there in your paid ads, that's going to be limited primarily to device and time and geo. One of the great and powerful things that I see too few users doing is saying, for my advertising reports, show me my site sections or my products. It's one of the funnest things in the world, especially with Black Friday being a month away, to say, for my paid social campaigns, which products did I actually sell when I thought I was focusing on this one? And often you can find very simple things to change in your creative when you realize that people are looking for a totally different product than you're currently sending them to. So it looks something like this. In this example, we had a general campaign around Google women's apparel that was doing pretty well, but when we dove into the dresses and travel area, that's where we found that the performance needed to be changed, and we were able to make a creative update there really quickly. So I've got just a couple minutes left. And so there's one last principle that I would have you remember as you're using Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics to look at your advertising data. And it's the concept of going beyond just puking out reports and refreshing dashboards and doing the most basic of reporting and really get into storytelling instead. And so there's three pieces. Of course, there's the data, and hopefully I've demonstrated how Adobe can help you with that. But then you have the narrative, and that is a good example of something that can only come from you. Now, within the Marketing Cloud, we try to facilitate that storytelling by having the concept of data sharing. So rather than being in a report, seeing something that was really interesting, and thinking to yourself, I should probably act on that, and then forgetting as you move on to something else. Instead, directly from that report, regardless of which solution you're in, you're able to share it out as a card in the Marketing Cloud where you have one shared workspace with your whole company and your whole team where you can say, this report and this row and this column has something that we need to act on. Let's do this together. And that narrative is something that needs to come from you. And then, of course, with the visuals, we will then back you up and help you prove why that's so important. And it's the intersection of those three things that Brent Dykes, our analytics evangelist, taught me is where the story power comes from. I'm sure that many of you have good reports that have solid data. And I would think that some of those reports have decent visualizations that you would hope can overcome the temptation just to put it on auto-delete. But it's really just that final piece of the narrative saying that let's go beyond basic updates and descriptions and explanations and go into something more prescriptive that will make that something that your company will appreciate. So I hope you would be able to avoid these main mistakes. I did my best to try and avoid it in this presentation, but you probably saw a few places where I was a hypocrite and stumbled on myself. But make sure that you understand your audience first. And that means not only understanding your customers, but understanding your internal stakeholders. Finding out what it is that would get your boss a raise and helping her to do that. And then making sure that you're speaking in their language and just getting out of the way and letting the data speak for themselves. So as you avoid those mistakes, the main principles you want to get into is not showing everything, but narrowing it down to that data that matters most. We talked about that 3x3 framework. If you've forgotten it, here's what the 3x3 means. It means 3 filters, 3 sorts. First filter is converting. Second filter is non-converting cost. Third filter is ignored impressions. The sorts in each of those filters are volume leaders that must be balanced against efficiency threats together. And then specifically within search, we're pretty spoiled to have rank and position to help us see how those things are together. But anyway, in the end, I can promise you this. If you talk with us more, if you meet with me and the many members of my team that are here today, we'll help you to reinvent yourself. If some of your analytics and your advertising right now is struggling around some of the basic descriptive and explanatory types of work, we can help you get to the diagnostic types of report. For example, diagnostic comes down to the concept of 2 things: anomaly detection and contribution analysis. Those are another set of 2 really smart questions that I only have a few people ask. So anomaly detection is taking out all the concepts of seasonality and cyclicality and things that you would predict as a peak or valley and saying, no, this is truly weird. This is truly an anomaly despite the year-over-year trends or anything you can compare it to. This is something different that we need to look at. And then after you identify that anomaly detection, which is something that is built in to Adobe Analytics for free as part of your contract and is applied to all advertising data from Media Optimizer, then you can get into contribution analysis to answer the question, why? What made that weird thing happen? And then we can give you the prescriptions and forecasts to help you get back to this summary again, to make sure that you're listening to your clients through your analytics, making sure that you're connecting with new clients through audience management, and making sure that the ads are executed and served in an easy way through Media Optimizer. So I really hope that you come and beat me up with hard questions. I look forward to talking to you throughout the rest of the day.